Hey, what's going on, guys? So, I remember when Netflix announced that Devil May Cry was gonna be their next big video game anime adaptation. I was over the freaking moon. And for two reasons. The first being that, when I was a kid growing up, Devil May Cry was one of my favorite video game franchises. I mean, look, I was a weird, edgy, goth-ish, weeb, trash teenager, so naturally, I was the target demographic for that video game series. But reason number two, this announcement came just as Castlevania was between seasons and being primarily written by comic book legend Warren Ellis. And I love Castlevania. Or, much rather, I love Warren Ellis's Castlevania. I'm not really a big Castlevania guy. You know, I played the Lord of Shadows games and I thought those were pretty fun. But I never got into Castlevania in the same way that I got into Devil May Cry or God of War, Infamous, Uncharted, Dead Space. It was definitely a thing where I had a bias against 2D platformer games growing up, but Castlevania just wasn't my thing. But I love Warren Ellis, and he's one of my favorite writers in comics. Like, he was 90% of the reason why I watched that Castlevania series in the first place, and when he left the show, for real-world reasons, you could tell. Like, the later seasons of Castlevania definitely feel like someone trying to mimic Warren Ellis, but not really getting what works about his writing style beyond excessive swearing and sexual innuendo. So, when it was announced that he wouldn't be the writer behind the new Devil May Cry series, and instead it would be Adi Shankar, my initial reaction was, needless to say, when we started getting trailers, I thought the animation looked pretty cool. I actually didn't mind that they got Johnny Youngwash to play a younger, closer to DMC3 era Dante. I also was genuinely intrigued by the notion of the series being pitched as a commentary on early 2000s America under the Bush administration. As one of the 5 Devil May Cry fans who actually likes the DMC reboot, and that game's They Live style narrative commentary on how the world is run by demons who control Western banks, media, and food production, I was interested to see what this new Devil May Cry anime was going to look like. And then I sat down and I actually watched the show. And, this was not what I was expecting a Devil May Cry adaptation to be. Like, at all. That said, despite the seemingly overwhelmingly negative response to the show, my feelings on it personally,
not great, not terrible.
So, case in point, this show is a bad adaptation of Devil May Cry. But I'm going to put the heaviest asterisk next to bad adaptation as possible, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it is a bad adaptation, while simultaneously attempting to deconstruct and elevate the mythology of Devil May Cry. And again, I'm going to put a heavy asterisk next to mythology. And it's also a critique of the Bush administration and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and the war on terror, all through the lens of Devil May Cry. Now, working my way backwards from that last point, on paper, I'm actually not opposed to the idea of reshaping Devil May Cry to be this critique of Western imperialism as an attempt to elevate the material. Because first of all, that was the entire point of the installment before last with DMC Devil May Cry. Although, with that game, Mundus and all of the demons were controlling the human world from the shadows through economics and media and blah 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 blah. They were basically, like I said, the Illuminati aliens from They Live. Here, however, the demons are, first of all, not really demons. They're aliens from another dimension because 2,000 years ago, Sparta was this great champion of the demon army, but he favored humans and decided to split the human world from the demon world. Which, okay, so far that's the premise of the games. But now, in the show, 2,000 years later, demons are trying to migrate back to the human world because the demon world is experiencing climate change or something. But they're in conflict with Darkholm, which is essentially ice, but for demons. Okay. Look, I'm probably gonna be in the vast minority here when I say this, but I don't think any of those ideas are particularly bad. Honestly, I don't think they're bad ideas. I just don't think they come together cohesively. I think the metaphors get a little muddled here and there, and the way these ideas are approached narratively and thematically, I think misses the overall point of Devil May Cry. And again, I'm going to put another heavy asterisk next to the point. I know I keep doing that, but just bear with me for a second. And here's the part where I'm going to piss off a lot of my fellow Devil May Cry fans. Because I 100% sympathize and understand the appeal of wanting to elevate and deconstruct the mythology of Devil May Cry. Because despite the foundational lore being quite sound and really good, everything with Sparta and Dante and Virgil, all that is genuinely really cool and can make for some really interesting storytelling. The problem is, or much rather the problem from a narrative direction standpoint, is that Devil May Cry isn't like Metal Gear, or Uncharted, or Dead Space, or The Last of Us. It's not like any of these other narrative-based interactive experiences with a story that builds on itself game to game. The story of Devil May Cry, and again, we're just gotta be honest with ourselves and take a big step back. The story of Devil May Cry is a lot of cool ideas that are loosely woven through a bunch of even cooler boss battles and level designs while you run around killing demons in the most over-the-top ways while aura farming and power maxing. Hence why I put so many damn asterisks when talking about the story and the themes and the ideas behind these games. And I get it. The writing in these games is cheesy. The characters are a little silly. And, the lore and history of Devil May Cry, I mean, look, that's the other thing. The lore and history of Devil May Cry is a mess. Because you have that first game, and it's solid, and it has a simple narrative foundation. And to be fair, if you wanted to adapt that could be its own show. Then you get Devil May Cry 2, and, that game sort of just does its own thing, and it has no real connection to the first game. But it's the game that introduces Dante's iconic sword rebellion, so I guess you can't write it off completely. And then you get Devil May Cry 3, and this is the iconic Devil May Cry game. This is the Empire Strikes Back. This is the Devil May Cry that people think of when you say Devil May Cry. And it's technically a prequel to Devil May Cry 1, but it's so inconsistent with enough details that it may as well just be a soft reboot of the franchise. And then you get the original Devil May Cry anime, which in my opinion still holds up to this day. It's a great show with a really good soundtrack. But that show bridges the gap between Devil May Cry 1 and Devil May Cry 4, while again completely ignoring Devil May Cry 2. But its tone and aesthetic, despite being in line with the first Devil May Cry game, looks and feels nothing like Devil May Cry 4. Which brings us to Devil May Cry 4, and that game is all about this supposed Church of Sparta, and what even is that in relation to the first 3 games and the anime? Like, you would think that would be important considering there's an entire religion dedicated to the father of the face of this franchise. Like, okay, look, I get it. I get the impulse to want to take the mythology of Devil May Cry and fix it, and elevate it, and I also just get that as a comic book writer myself, the urge to be subversive. I do get it. Be that as it may, like I said earlier, there are some core themes and ideas that are inherent to these games. As loose as they are, they're still there. And I feel like in the writer's attempt to elevate the material and to be subversive, they ended up overlooking some of the cool stuff that was already there in the first place. First and foremost, demons not being inherently malevolent just ruins the overall thesis of Devil May Cry. That's just one of those consistent through lines. Demons are inherently evil, bloodthirsty monsters. And they sort of have to be, because that's what makes Sparta and Dante and Trish so unique. These are demons who are fighting against their own demonic nature in favor of embracing their humanity. It's why they cry when they lose the ones they love. It is literally in the name, Devil May Cry. It's also what makes Virgil such a tragic figure, in that he rejects his humanity because he sees it as a weakness, and it's the reason why he wasn't able to defend his family when demons attacked his mother and his brother. That's why he embraces his demonic heritage. And then there's Lady, in her whole arc in Devil May Cry 3, it paints her as Dante's opposite. Whereas Dante's father is a demon, her father is a human. Where Dante's father embraced humanity, Arkham embraced demonism. She's locked in this Oedipal struggle against her father to the point where she rejects the name that her father gave her. That's why she goes by Lady. And that's the whole thing with Devil May Cry. It's all about rising above who you are, rising above who you're afraid to be, and rising above where you come from. That is the point of this game franchise. And I feel like in Adi Shankar's attempt to elevate Devil May Cry, and his attempt to subvert the audience's expectations by making demons, these nuanced aliens from another dimension, he just really sort of missed the point of Devil May Cry completely. That said, if I am going to play fanboy editor here for a second, there's a few narrative quick fixes here that I think could have been made, and honestly could still be made for Season 2 in some cases. The big one, obviously, is this show's approach to demons. I really feel like if the writers lean into that Middle-earth idea, where 2,000 years ago, Earth was like Lord of the Rings. You had demons and humans, but also centaurs and fairies and dragons and, other little creatures. And when Sparta split the world in half, sealing away the demons in hell, he also ended up sealing away a bunch of nymphs and fairies who are now trapped in hell with a bunch of bloodthirsty demons. And over the course of the next 2,000 years, you have the descendants of these harmless creatures migrating to the human world through these rifts because they're genuinely not supposed to be in hell. And that's maybe where you get, cryptids and stuff like that. But also, you get to play up the immigration angle, where you have demons who slip through the cracks alongside these harmless cryptids who actually do pose a threat to humanity. And Darkholm is the gross overcorrection to the problem, and that's where you have Darkholm as your allegory for ice. I guess, look, I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I feel like this show's approach to demons and mythology from a deconstructionist point of view is simultaneously overthought and underthought, and I just feel like more could have been done with those ideas if you wanted to go in that direction. And while I'm at it, I just want to throw out there that I feel like having Lady go by Lady from the jump would have been a much better alternative to having her earn her iconic lore-accurate name from Dante simply just not knowing it. That felt stupid in like a comic book movie kind of a way.
So that's it? What, we some kind of suicide squad?
This is chaos magic, Wanda. And that makes you the Scarlet Witch.
Oh, shit. What? I put all my money on you, and now I just realized I'm never gonna win the,
Deadpool.
We're not doing that anymore.
But, as is, the show is, it's fine, I guess. I just, the whole thing feels like a first or second draft that really needed some fine-tuning. But I'm not going to be like one of those other YouTubers out here who's like, Adi Shankar, he's not a real Devil May Cry fan. I mean, guys, for the love of God, look at the guy. You cannot look at this man and tell me that he is not a Devil May Cry fan. I know my people, and this is just what we unfortunately look like when we're well into our 40s. This is what I'm going to look like when I'm well into my 40s, and this is just what Addy looks like because he's a Devil May Cry fan. I know this. But I do feel like in his attempt to elevate the narrative of Devil May Cry and, subvert the audience's expectations, he ended up, like I said, overlooking what was already there, and instead of building on that, he sort of just took the set dressing of Devil May Cry and made his own thing, which, in my opinion, could have been a little more refined. I don't hate it. I see what Netflix and Audi were attempting, and I see what they were going for, and I just don't think it worked. Which is a shame, because I think the foundational lore of the Devil May Cry games is really cool, and could really make for a really awesome TV show or movie. But I also think a lot of the ideas that are present in the show here were potentially really cool and interesting as well. It's just a shame that they don't cohesively meld together. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Devil May Cry anime Netflix series. But what about you? What did you think? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Are you a DMC reboot apologist like myself? Am I not alone in the universe? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you gotta do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, take care, guys.